Hello everyone and welcome to this episode of You Deserve Fresh Lettuce. I am your co-host Rachel.
And I'm Delia.
And in this episode we're going to be talking about what you need to know when you're preparing for marriage. Oh my gosh, the things that we should talk about that we don't talk about.
Exactly.
All right, if you're not doing so already, please follow us on our social media account at YDFL Podcast. And you can listen to us on your favorite podcast platform, including
Alexa,
Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, you name it, we are on there.
And we are also on YouTube, guys.
Yes.
And we are trying to grow our following, so make sure that you come check us out on YouTube, the new setup, the fits, the talking with the hands. Subscribe, listen, share.
Sharing is caring. Let's do it. All right. And those of you listening in 28 countries around the world, thank you for your support. That is awesome. Okay, so let's get into it. What are some of the things that, in hindsight, that we sit there going, oh my God, like we should have addressed these things before we got married?
I will tell you something that I didn't realize was such an important thing until after. But I thankfully did address these things, and that is figuring out if you want to get married and have a private license or a public license.
So okay? I didn't know the difference, so tell us.
Yeah, so the private license is you have to pay extra money, so that means that it's not public record that you actually married someone, okay? And now what's important about that, in my opinion, is should your mate be under any type of collection, bankruptcy, or anything like that, it will not automatically attach, because the thing is that we assume that anything before marriage has nothing to do with you. Yes, technically, but technically not, because then it somehow you marry it all. And so, but if you file privately, if you file your license privately, if he has student debt, if he has bankruptcies, if he has any liens against him, it's not public record that you got married.
So it won't go to you.
So it's not going to go to you. And so it's kind of a little bit of a protection. And that is something that I did do, by the way, which thank God
You did private?
I did do private.
Okay.
And I do think it's important that people understand the difference. Now, secondly, I think that this is something that I didn't know because I got married very young, was whether or not you want to add their name or just take their name or hyphenate.
Oh, that's true.
The hyphenation part about it, right?
It's becoming so trendy, right? To do that.
And to like just add the last name. And that's kind of what I did. So I never had to change any of my banking information because
okay. You didn't add the name?
Because I added his name. So my maiden last name stayed. And then his name was added. So technically nothing had to be closed and open.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
And nothing like that, because everything was all like kind of together.
And that's a really big thing in the Latin community, you guys. And, you know, maybe even like the Middle Eastern communities, I don't know. But I know for sure in the Latin communities, I know that when I was getting married, my dad, he was like, you're gonna be, you know, this, your last name hyphen his name, right? And I was like, well, no. And he's like, well, yeah, he was speaking in Spanish, so he says, yeah, because you would be de. So you're like your maiden name and then de and then his name. And I was like,
his property.
So yeah, so then I didn't even think that far. I just was like, I'm born and raised in the United States. I'm like, no, I'm switching my name to his. My sister-in-laws, though, all like the ones that did get married and everything, they did do that. They kept their birth name, and then they did the DE, and then the other name. So they did that. The ones from Mexico and stuff like that. So I think that it's like a really interesting thing to consider. I recently saw something on social media where they these podcast guys. I wish I could remember the name of the show. And it's a show like ours, and they're talking about relationships. And all the guys got their phones and put their fiancés on speaker, their girlfriends, and said, hey, if we were to get married, would you take my last name? And they were on air. The girls didn't know they were being recorded. And so 3 of the guys in the room, the girls were like, well, yeah, take your last name. And the one guy was like, the girl goes, no, well, I don't think I would. And he's like, well, why wouldn't you? And it became this whole thing. And then she's like, wait, you're putting this on the show? She was so upset.
Hey, it's content.
Yeah. So you should have that conversation about the last name, for sure.
Well, I do know that if you don't change the last name, because for a while there, by the way, even though I did do what I just told you, like added the last name under our license, our marriage license, I didn't change all this stuff in the banking systems because I didn't feel like it. I didn't want to go to the Social Security, and I didn't want to do other things. So when I had my first daughter, by the way, she was my maiden last name, so baby blah, blah, blah. Well, so when he would show up to the hospital, he would show up as my last name, like father, blah, blah, blah. But
so you were like a single mom. That's
exactly.
how it is for single moms.
Kinda.
Mm-hmm.
And the good thing is that considering my old colleague did not mind he didn't mind that. And so, but that could be a conversation because I know someone specifically that had the biggest issue with her having, previous person's last name. And I can see that kind of, that could be an issue. But that is something that you should have a conversation, not to mention that's part of one of many conversations along with finances.
My cousin lucked out. She married someone with her exact last name.
Imagine that.
So they had the same last name.
You know what? I have a cousin the same way. And so she could take it double. Like sometimes I see like Smith or Johnson and
it's
Johnson
like to the
and
second
Johnson.
power.
Yeah, to the 10th power.
Smith
second
squared.
Power. Yeah. So, but on another note, because we're talking about, private filing or what have you, also it's really important that you talk about finances. Like, does your partner have student debt?
Here's the thing. Not only the debt, okay, so everybody's bringing something to the table, right? But like, not only the debt or the credit score or whatever, but really the future plans. Like, what is the money management, idea?
Who's paying the bills?
Yeah,
right?
like, who's going to cover, the rent and mortgage? Is it 50-50? Is it like the husband? So, for example, in my life, I do believe in gender roles. So I am pro gender roles. So to me, it's like, you know what? The husband's going to cover the roof and the this and the whatever. And then, you know what? If I want a certain type of furniture, I don't mind buying it. Or if I want a certain type of, whatever, like I don't mind paying for it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so at the end of the day, you do have to have this conversation about what it looks like in the marriage.
Yes.
Financially.
Yes.
I know that when it comes to, for example, credit cards, I was a little bit blindsided because the person that I was married to had this thing where every offer was like, yes, yes, yes. And then putting my social, on there. And it was like, oh, here, babe, here's your card. And then it was like, well, why do we have all these cards? And so, I was young. I didn't understand, over time it was fine. But then I just was like, oh, because after the divorce, ladies and gentlemen, that is the stuff that comes back to bite you. Yes.
Yeah, to haunt you for sure. And I think it's so important that also that, we've talked about it on other episodes about having a private secret account, and that is like under your mama's name. But this is a little different only because I know that, this is like another account, and I get it. Some people maybe don't have that flexibility, but I do believe that, whatever it is that you make, however much money you make, I really do believe in my heart that you should have your own account, meaning like this amount of money is maybe your play money, maybe it's like to pay a bill, some bills, a part of whatever it is.
It's like Steve Harvey talks about it. He says you should have 4 to 5 different bank accounts if you can. You don't have to be rich, by the way, to have 4 to 5 bank accounts. He talks about making sure that your husband's money stays his money separately, your money stays your money separately, but you should have a joint account. The joint account, you should be putting money in together. We're not telling you what to do, but this is what he says.
Yeah.
Because that's for your future. You should both be contributing to the long-term goal, the financial goal, which is retirement or whatever. So you should both be contributing to that. But he admitted that, let's just say the woman doesn't make as much money as him. Let's just say you're a woman that you don't make as much money as your husband, or you don't work, okay?
Yeah.
He should still give you an allowance. And by the way, he said both of you should get an allowance. So it's like your paychecks are going in here or his is going here. It's like his allowance, your allowance, right? And that your allowance should be higher because it's more expensive to look the way you look. Yes, to be a woman is way more expensive. But I can tell you, I don't know how you and your ex or whatever had it, but I know for me, we did have separate bank accounts. In the beginning, we did not. And the sticking point was anytime I went to go buy him a gift, so like for his birthday, or do something sweet that I thought I was being sweet for him because I saw this jacket and I'm like, oh, he'd love it.
Yeah.
He felt like he was buying it for himself, that he was buying himself something that he wouldn't have bought. And it was 5 years of this, by the way.
Yeah.
And so quickly my grandfather and my grandmother were like, you need to just you're making your own money now, have your own accounts.
Yeah, no, and that's the way it was also, but I can see that how they would be like, well, I bought this gift for myself.
Yeah.
Because, you don't work or you don't do this or you don't contribute or whatever, if that's the way that they're looking at you and depending on how that dynamic works out. So I can see the importance of that, by the way, and I think a lot of the time people don't talk about that. So I think it's important that you do have, a small amount, that each person has some type of an allowance if you don't have a surplus of money coming through.
Yeah.
To where it's like, okay, you have this much money allocated for your expenses.
For entertainment.
And entertainment or what have you, and or, we as women, we need to get our nails done, our hair done, and
Yeah.
and all the things. And so that's some money that needs to be allocated towards that. And then also the men, obviously, like men like to do things like going golfing
Yeah.
and going fishing and going
With their hobbies.
on their little hobby trips. And so
Yeah.
there should be a certain amount of money that is allocated towards those types of hobbies also.
And I think having a conversation about, you know, the kids that don't exist yet, and having a conversation about college tuition.
Yes.
If you're going to be a parent who's going to harp on good grades and education, you better have the money in the bank to pay for it. And so often people put all this pressure on their kids to strive, you know, for academic excellence, but they're not prepared to spend the $50,000 to $100,000 on these schools that they want to go to. They're sitting there saying, "Well, no, you'll have to figure it out and get the student loans or get the, you know,
Right.
the grants," which many of us got. Like I got a grant and stuff like that. So I know that that's a conversation you should have to be able to say, "Hey, do you believe in a college fund, or do you believe that they'll figure it out?" Because that's an important thing.
That is so
and
important.
that way the kid knows, like, hey, you better get good grades because then you're gonna not qualify for the grants.
You can also, I mean, there are these different plans that you can actually get on. I know that for us, like we had that for the girls, like since they were like born, and so you
like
put
the Gerber stuff and stuff like that.
Yeah, sort of, right? And I believe it's something like a 529 exchange is what it's called. And so you basically put money in there, and then it starts to grow. And so they give you a timeline. By the time, you know, the youngest is 18, they should have so much money allocated towards their college, depending on how you do it. It can only be, if I'm not mistaken, it can only be used for school. You can't take it out and like go buy a fancy car if you decide to put a couple $100,000 away. It has to be used only for schooling. I believe you can gift it towards someone in your family, but don't quote me on that. So
this is not financial advice, and we are not
financial advisors.
Yeah.
But I am saying that, you know, those are the conversations that you need to have if that's what you decide, and even if it's a very minimal amount once you have children. And also, you know, the one thing that I think is so important, because we're talking about the topic of children, is like, are you guys both the same religion? And do you guys have the same religious background? And not to mention, oh my gosh, this is such a big one, by the way, and only because I've been on, you know, dating here and there, whatever. Your political views. That is
even vaccination.
I mean, that is such a big deal. That is such a conversational piece. That could be the make or break. Whether you believe or you don't believe in certain things. I'm not going to put my thought processes out there, but I'll tell you what. I've narrowed down my belief system, and I've narrowed down my choices with whoever I decide to go out on second dates, based on their political views on vaccinations, non-vaccination, on whether or not they agree with current political standard views or not. Like, I'm not putting my stuff out there. I'm just saying, like, that is a make or break, because I know at the end of the day, it's going to be an issue.
It's going to be a sticking point for sure.
So why even go there? So I think that those conversations, you need to have those conversations.
You should absolutely have them. I think if you are coming into the marriage with pre-existing families, so like you have your children from another relationship already, I think having a conversation of what that looks like, because we talked about this in previous episodes, you know, what is the disciplinary like action plan, you know, the fact that you're not that child's parent. What does that look like? Also, what does that look like financially? Because as we've talked about before, you marry someone that has a kid, and maybe your partner is paying child support. And maybe, by the way, you're making all this money. Now, your money could be essentially potentially counted towards what that child is owed. The parent is owed for that child. And so there's all these things, and we're not trying to scare you, but it's at the end of the day, like, I get that we get that ignorance is bliss, but it's so much better if you can just kind of get some of these things out of the way. And at least have some sort of, you know, roadmap to like, okay, it's almost like a prenup. It's like, okay, we already kind of went through these things ahead of time.
Right.
And then now we can move forward.
Because there was that one book that we've talked about so many times, and I know that we talked about it in the first season, and it's called 101 Questions to Ask Before.
The Patrick Bet-David book?
Yeah, the one that he actually, I believe that, I want to say, and don't quote me on this, I believe that he had about the girls that he was dating, maybe like a good 6 or 7 girls, read the book, answer the questions, and then based on that, he made an analysis of whether or not they were going to like be a good partner, a good fit for him. And I think that obviously, his wife currently is the one that probably
passed the test.
Passed the test for his questions. And so I think it's really important that if you're thinking about it, that you should take that time to actually have your partner sit down and see. Initially, we don't want to ruffle feathers, as we always say.
That's what happens.
It's like, oh, do you believe in the vaccine? It's like, well, listen, it doesn't matter what I believe. What do you believe? And then you know what I mean. And then it's very passive.
We try to be very agreeable because we like the person, we love the person.
And then you're in a marriage, and it's like, no one's gonna make me do what I don't want to do.
They're holding you down with a needle.
Whether it's a man or a woman, regardless of who it is, like depending on your perspective and mindset, like you're not going to make someone do what you want them to do if they don't want to do it. And so I think it's so important that you go through these questions.
Even like kids, like talking about children and how many children,
Right.
I sit there, when my sons were younger, they'd say, oh, I'm going to have 7 to 10 kids. And I said, you cannot answer that question until you've had that conversation with the woman. You can't just sacrifice her lady parts, you know what I mean? Her little lady purse.
Vagina.
You know what I mean? To pop out these kids,
Yeah, no.
And so I think even the conversation, some people might say, I just want one. Some people, by the way, believe that they don't want to bring children into this world because the world is a mess. And to that I say, well, you got to make a world a better place by raising better humans, to change the world, But at the end of the day, people come with these different viewpoints about children.
But speaking of that, Rachel, it's so true. And I've also known of people that have decided to snip cut down there. And then all of a sudden they're dating someone that's much younger and she wants children. And there's a moment there where the man is really questioning whether or not he wants to go and unsnip it. And so if that's ultimately what you want, because obviously you're like, I love her and I'm willing to sacrifice this part of my life because you're bringing another human being into this world, and you're like, I don't care.
It's a lifelong commitment, that one.
It is beyond a lifelong commitment. And if that's what you decide to do, because there's people that I've known, by the way, never had one single child, and then all of a sudden they decide to cut it off, cut that whole that ability off. And so, not literally, but you know what I mean.
I'm like Lorena Bobbitt.
No, not literally, but they decide that they don't want to have children. And so if that's the person that you're with, then you have to understand that you can't make him then want to have a kid if he's chosen that for himself. So if you ultimately want to be a mom, go find yourself that man that's going to make you a mom if that's what you truly want. Don't go in thinking that you're going to go around changing.
Don't fit that person into a box.
Yeah, you're going to go around changing the world or changing the man. You're not. And so that's a really important conversation, by the way.
It is. And especially, when you're talking about children and finances and religion and I think at the end of the day, though, a lot of it can go to the wayside because, there is love and there is this desire to move forward anyways. And it could prompt you to have these tough discussions. What might seem like a harmless, conversation could get a little bit sort of, hairy here. You know what I mean? It could and stuff like that. So is there anything else that stands out to you that
ring size. My gosh.
Oh, man.
Sure.
You're going to talk about the ring size before he proposed. You
have to talk about where, whether or not he believes in that. Sometimes guys don't want to be in the city. They want to be in the countryside. Sometimes guys want to be in a high rise. Maybe that's not your flow.
Lifestyle, you guys. Let me see. Delia and I, we talk about this.
It's
lifestyle
so
because we're in Southern California. There's a lot of men that make really great money, right? It doesn't mean that their quote unquote lifestyle or the desired lifestyle that they live is ideal for her or ideal for me. It's not just about the money, it's about the long-term goal. If you are a city girl and like you said, you see yourself in a high-rise and the guy's like, I just want to be in the country with 8 cows and a horse.
Yeah. I mean, let me give you a perfect scenario or example. Let's just say Kim Kardashian and Kanye West. He went and bought a whole ass farm in Wyoming and then wants to move her from, granted, she lives in the suburbs in LA, but it's different from being in the suburbs of LA of something that she's known her whole entire life versus going from there to Wyoming. By the way, Wyoming's absolutely gorgeous. I've been to Wyoming. Mm-hmm. It's so beautiful, but that doesn't mean that that's where you want to go.
Great place to visit.
But not to live, right? And so I think those are conversations that you need to have. Honey, if it gets too expensive here and, you had a secondary place in your mind that you would want to move to. If he says, I want to move you to Antarctica, I know it sounds so wild and out there, but let's just say, if you're a person that's anything like me, where you get cold right away, you'd be like, you're batshit, you know what? Like, I am not moving to Antarctica.
Yeah.
So I think these are conversations that you need to have, in my opinion. Like, you know, whether or not you'd want that farm life. Like, I know that now that I'm getting to this age, especially after the pandemic, like having farm fresh eggs, like you're like, that would be freaking phenomenal.
Yes.
Or like, you know, some fresh tomatoes, like that would be amazing. But had you have talked to me 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I'd be like, well, I want to be in LA, like right in the center, in the heart of the heartbeat of it. Now, not so much. So that these are conversations you need to have with your partner to say, where would you want to live?
Okay, so do women have the mother-in-law, in-law conversation before getting married?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Think about it. Like, you have to understand, depending on how young you are, how old you are, you know, if this is your second rodeo, if this is your first rodeo, if anything happens to your mom or dad, how are we going to step up to the plate for your parents?
Yes.
Maybe they don't have parents. Maybe they do. Maybe they're the only child. Like, okay, how are we going to step up to the plate? Like, do we build a back house? Do they stay in one of the rooms? Do we build a bathroom? Like,
do we save for like a senior living community?
Or a senior living?
What's the
like
plan?
That is so important, and oftentimes I think we forget about that because we're so involved with, I always say this, like, the centerpieces and the invitations and what we're serving for dinner.
The
event. But there is more to life than the event leading to the marriage. Like, these are conversations you need to have with your partner, whether it's your husband or, you know, I'm talking to the men now, or your wife, where you're like, honey, if something happens to your mom and she has a stroke, like, what do we do? It's like, what do we do? You know?
Yeah, for sure.
And you have to be open to the idea that, or even, let's just say, God forbid, that you have, that your brother or sister, you know, they get into an accident. I've heard of this before. And the kids, are you willing to take the kids in?
Take the kids in. You know, I think that one of the things with the next generation, that's the aging population, you know, we have to have a conversation about who's financially responsible. More than just a living in a situation. It's like, okay, what if your mom has her own little house, but like, are you the one paying that house? Or maybe your dad passed away and like your husband, you know, your husband's mom, your mother-in-law is a widower, and like now she depends on you financially. What does that look like? And so I think all of these things are really important, and at least for an initial opening your mind to the possibility of where they're coming from.
This could happen.
Because some guys could be like, my mom comes first, and like, I'm gonna pay all that, even if we live in an apartment or whatever. Like, you have to just kind of see where the tone is heading.
For sure.
Not for you to call off the wedding or anything like that, but just for you to prepare mentally or strategically to go, you know, maybe I should get a job.
Mentally, strategically, financially. That's so important that you talk about those things. And
what about girls' nights out? Did you talk about that before wedding, the marriage?
I think that's important, definitely. It depends, right? Like, it depends on, gosh, it sucks because it matters so much how much you trust a person, honestly.
It does.
Because because I've known of people that get married even though the man slept with the freaking stripper girl, and so now if he's out to, you know, bachelor party, now you're gonna think that he doesn't know how to act right. And so I think sometimes, like, if you don't want to rattle that cage, that you should contain that a little bit. Like, don't go out there so much if that's not if that's not how you want your relationship to flow. Then you should contain we're going out, only girls, only this, only that, no guys allowed, because that opens yourself up to the possibility of doubt, and nothing good comes out of doubt. So that's kind of my idea regarding that. But I could have someone say that I'm crazy and that I shouldn't think that way. But, you know, I mean, we all have, I mean, this is why it'd be important to have this conversation. But honestly, I think more than anything, and this is something that I'm going to take my own advice, that book, 101 Questions, I think that would be wonderful to kind of understand what 101 questions to ask. And not to mention, I don't know how this is so important, but I had someone tell me the love language is so important, that you know the person's love language.
It is. So I was actually going to touch on that a little bit, because I think that if you can come to the table pretty honest with yourself about your own hangups, I think, I'm not saying go on a whole like couch session with them and like reveal all your toxic traits, but I think if you have these little kind of glitches in your matrix, like I think it would be great to be able to say, hey, look, you know, I want this to work so well. I'm super excited about marrying you. I do these little things, and I think that this is why I do them. I'm not really sure. And these are the things that kind of trigger them, and I really hope to work past them, and it's not you, it's me type thing.
Right.
And I don't know, though, because here's the thing. I haven't been in a situation where I've had to lay these things out, and you haven't either.
Yeah, no, I haven't.
So, but we've, in hindsight, gone, oh my gosh, is this something that we would want to do, is like lay it out. When you and I went into business, anybody I go into business with, by the way.
Yeah.
But really with her and I showed up, and it was like, oh, let's talk about and I said, first and foremost, I have some baggage that I need to set on the table. And I need
to unload this.
And you have to understand, I am coming with PTSD.
Oh my gosh,
these are the things that basically will trigger it. Like, and it's not her responsibility. It wasn't like I expected her to like now tiptoe around that. It was to just say, this is a real thing that I have, and I'm working through it because of my past business relationships. And she was like, oh, okay.
And I had to be understanding and say, okay, well, let's put it in writing. And, you know, and I think most things should be in writing anyway.
Yeah,
and
that
I'm
was
totally, and, you know, to me, I'm like, let's do it. Let's put it in writing. Let's see what, you know, what this business plan looks like. And at the end of the day, I mean, this is the biggest contract you're going to sign in your lifetime. So it's got to be, it's got to be the most important thing that you give so much thought to. And it's not just because I love him, because I love her. It literally needs to be down in almost in a contract format to say, this is what I expect, kinda, and this is what I expect of you and of me, and this is how we're going to work this out. And at the end of the day, if you don't put it in writing, or if you don't sit down and talk about it, then there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be missing. Like, I thought you were doing that. No, I thought you were doing that. And so I think at the end of the day, the message is right, Rachel.
Yeah.
What you're saying.
You know what I think would be really fun? I just thought of this before we let you guys go. Wouldn't it be fun? And you guys are probably going to be like, hell no, shots fired.
Yeah.
But I think it'd be kind of fun if you set up like a room with like just like we have here, like cameras, whatever, recording devices. And then each of you sits in there by yourself separately, but answers the same questions. And then you watch, and then you watch the videos back together to go, what? That's what you did? Because it's almost like, how do you get to the truth if you're both, because someone's going to go, oh no, I agree with you there. Because they just want to walk down the aisle.
Right,
I almost feel like
he's like, I want to eat McDonald's every night. She's like, me too. I want chicken nuggets every night. And so it's like, no, you don't.
No, you don't.
No, you don't.
I almost feel like it could be a fun premarital, and maybe the disastrous, by the way, if you know, comment.
Yeah, for sure.
But I could see it could be a kind of a fun, interesting little thing to go, okay, we have 100 questions, and you're going to sit in here, you're going to answer them on camera, and then an hour later or whatever, I'm going to come in, and you leave, and then I'm going to answer them. By the way, you have not exchanged each other's answers. Can you imagine? But there's always going to be the people that go, what would he have answered that? I bet he would say this, so I'm going to say that too. Toxic. Tóxicas.
Siguiente episodio de
Tóxicas. Anyways, I tried. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. And don't forget that we are on every Tuesday, and you deserve fresh lettuce. Cheers.